Assalamu alaikum and greetings one and all. Welcome to another episode on the Money Council. I've recently attended the International Islamic Finance Conference held in Cape Town, and what a excellent and well organized event, and compliments to the iConsult Africa team here in Cape Town for pulling such a successful event off. And it was really themed around sustainable investing and impact investing with a Sharia compliant or Islamic finance view. And we had a number of delegates from all over the world, and we also had a panel discussion by various asset managers, including Camissa Asset Management. And our guest expert with me today, Abdulaziz Davids, the PM and Head of Research at Camissa, will be looking at this conversation or this theme around impact investing and what does that mean. So we'll be heading straight into that right after this.
حي على الفلاح.
Welcome back to the Money Council, and we are discussing ESG investing, or investing with goodness. And we might just ask, what is ESG? What does it stand for? And at the back of understanding sustainable Islamic investing and impact investing, we have our guest in the studio, Abdulaziz Davids from Camissa Asset Management. Assalamu alaikum, Abdul.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi Adnan. Shukran for the opportunity.
Welcome back, and again excited to have you with me to discuss this very interesting topic, and like yourself, you've been one of the panel speakers from the asset management point of view, looking at investing with an ESG lens.
Yes.
And perhaps just for the benefit for all our subscribers and viewers, is to maybe kick off by just understanding what is ESG all about.
Yes, shukran. ESG is really an acronym that stands for environmental, social and governance, the acronym. And typically when we talk about ESG funds or investments, it's investments that filter for those specific factors. So on the environmental side, clearly the focus there is on industries or companies or processes that doesn't do harm to the environment. I think a couple of years ago, if one think of that big spill that happened by BP in the Gulf of Mexico, I think a couple of thousand of marine life basically was killed because of that oil spill. So that's probably the worst example of environmental impact. On the social side, and bringing it closer to home, in South Africa, we've got our mining industry, where they typically have very poor social practices around migrant labor that goes into the mines, miners struggling for a living wage. So typically that would be another screening filter for on the social side. And then lastly, from a governance point of view, we're talking here of good corporate governance, where there are best practices implemented by a board of directors, for example. And typically that's where asset managers like ourselves can have a much greater and meaningful impact as well, where we look at remuneration of directors, we look at conflicts that arise between directors and their fiduciary responsibilities to shareholders as well. So in a nutshell, that is what ESG is all about.
Right. I mean, it can be a mouthful. I mean, just through a bit of research that I've done, just trying to understand what ESG investing is all about. If you can summarize, it's really around doing business in a better way.
Yes.
And also trying to deal with solving perhaps some of the world's biggest challenges that we are facing.
Yes.
Now, you as an asset manager, you obviously look at the equity market, you're looking at companies that are listed, and doing this type of screening, as you mentioned, to these companies to see how they're fulfilling these goals. Can one, or is it only defined to the equity market, to listed companies, this ESG screening or standards?
So I think that's a very good question, and it goes much wider than the stock market or the equity market or even unit trusts, in the sense that the idea behind ESG investing is to change behavior. As you rightly said, the focus is on not impacting negatively on either the environment, society at large, or shareholders for that matter, from a governance point of view. And to that end, we've got asset managers that have a duty to play. But in my view, the banks or financial institutions have a much bigger role to play, because because typically, I mean, companies, they need funding for projects. And we've seen an example of that in South Africa, where some of the larger banks have decided not to finance new coal mines, for example. And we know that South Africa, I mean, the bulk of our electricity comes from coal sort of source. So that will have a meaningful impact on that industry. So the idea is with ESG is to change behavior and to redirect behavior from bad practices to better or good practices that has a better outcome for the environment, society at large, or for shareholders or investors as well.
Abdul, now taking that sort of perspective on ESG investing, and you manage Sharia compliant portfolios with Camissa,
yes,
formerly known as Kagiso.
Yes.
Is there a similarity, or can one sort of put them in the same basket, that being Sharia compliant investing and ESG investing?
Yes, a very good question, because we get that a lot in terms of people saying that surely what does Sharia say about ESG? The reality is that our Prophet ﷺ has been the forefront of environmental awareness and consciousness more than 1400 years ago.
Yes.
And the very fact that we do a lot of screening to check for Sharia compliance of companies, that lends itself to checking for ESG as well.
Yes.
So I think there's a whole body of evidence that suggests that ESG screening and Sharia compliance screening are symbiotic. There's a very strong relationship there. And actually the outcomes, you might be surprised to know, is that Sharia with ESG as an overlay has resulted in much better outcomes compared to just plain ESG investing.
Right.
So I think on both fronts, both in terms of the research and filtering process, and then also in terms of the outcomes, in terms of the actual investing process, Sharia ESG has done a lot better than the rest of the market as well.
Right, Abdul. I mean, so you've shared some practical sort of implementation that you have within your fund research process.
Yes.
And perhaps for us just to look at a practical example,
Yes.
and perhaps look at a company that's listed on the stock market and what you call the scorecard that your analyst or your investment team looks at. So maybe just briefly touch on the three,
Yes.
the ESG components.
Yeah, our viewers should be seeing a graphic of an ESG scorecard that we've developed in-house. And I must say, just taking a step back, we've done ESG analysis for the last almost 15 years, before ESG became mainstream in South Africa. And we did a lot of work with one of our sell-side service providers that was based in the UK to develop our proprietary ESG scorecard. So we think at the time, certainly, I mean, many of our competitors are now doing ESG, and they all have their own form of a scorecard. But at the time when we introduced our scorecard, we were certainly pioneers in that respect. And many of our clients have lauded us for that process as well. So on screen, we're looking at Omnia, the one company that is quite a substantial holding in our funds. And in particular, the scorecard is divided into three components: environmental, social, and then governance. And Omnia, because they're involved in both the mining industry in terms of supplying, for example, explosives for mining. They do a lot of chemicals as well, and more recently they've developed the fertilizer business as well. So from that point of view, there's a significant environmental impact.
Yes.
So the environmental score is quite pertinent and important for a company like Omnia. And over the last couple of years, we've had extensive engagements with Omnia around the environmental practices. We would like to think and take some credit for changing some behavior at Omnia as well around some of the environmental practices. But certainly the way we look at ESG and the scorecard in particular, you say, the investors, sometimes people talk about a carrot and stick phenomenon.
Yeah.
We would like to use the carrot rather than the stick.
Yes.
Because with the carrot, it's much easier to redirect behavior and change corporate behavior as well. Whereas if you just use it as a stick, it's sometimes quite difficult. People take offense.
Yeah.
So we use our scorecard as a carrot to motivate companies and say, to a company like Omnia, look at your scorecard relative to maybe an AECI or an Anglo-American. Certainly you can improve your score by doing this or that in terms of changing behavior as well.
Yes. And now maybe just to look at how that and the connection of what you've practically experienced through ESG filters or the research that you guys follow, in line with what the United Nations have set out as the SDGs, which is the Sustainable Development Goals that have been set out by the United Nations, and that a lot of countries now subscribe to and subsidiaries of those countries.
Yeah.
So maybe just to look at some of those goals.
Yes. So there's about 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and the idea behind them is that there's an aspiration to implement all of them. I think the deadline is 2030.
Yes.
Certainly, from our vantage point, a lot of them have more practical application for, as we discussed at the beginning, with banks and financial institutions in terms of changing behavior. In our context, we typically focus on just 3 of them. And that's where we have the greatest impact, which is around the environmental impact, some of the social sort of practices of companies. And then certainly I think where we can also have a great impact is in advocacy and collaboration with our peers in the industry. So there's about 3 of them that we have practical application for. But in essence, our practices and our processes around ESG is in harmony with those 17 SDGs. And we've had very good results as an industry in South Africa. And I must say South Africa has been at the forefront as well. We've got a code called the CRISA code,
yes.
the Code for Responsible Investing South Africa. Camissa was one of the pioneer signatories of that code. That came in, I think, 2012 already. So it's been 10 years. And certainly on the collaborative front, we've done pioneer work with our industry in South Africa as well.
Abdul, then just in closing, I mean, attending the conference, maybe sort of loss from your learnings and experience from the conference, what did you take out of that as an investment manager, and just looking at the peers that were also there at the event and the different discussions that happened?
Yeah. No, I think we were quite privileged and honored to be part of and being invited to participate in the conference. I think it's quite a pioneering effort in the sense that it's the first time you've had Shari'ah scholars, you've had asset managers, asset consultants,
yes.
and all of the stakeholders in this industry in one group.
Yes.
And we know it's a very competitive industry, but to share the platform with some of our peers and competitors, I think was groundbreaking. And likewise for the banking sector as well. I mean, we had all 4 of the major Islamic banks in the room as well, and in fact they shared a platform.
Yes.
So I think we can only build from there. I think there's a lot that we can achieve still as an industry in South Africa, but ultimately they always say you must keep your eye on the prize.
Yes.
The eye of the prize is really around getting more people to invest in the Sharia way, to either get financing through Sharia compliant vehicles.
Yes.
We've got the products, we've got the performance that to back up those products as well. It's really about creating the awareness and making sure that through conferences, through this very show, we create that awareness as well.
Certainly, Abdul. I mean, that's the objective of the Money Council, is to create a platform where we publicly discussing these types of solutions that are out there and tools. So thank you again, Abdul. Hope you have benefited from this episode. Do subscribe to the channel, click on the bell for further notifications on our future episodes, and share and like as you would have done usually. And we shukran for watching this video. Until next time, thank you and bye-bye.
حي على الفلاح.